It tastes like carrot cake. It feels like a cinnamon roll. And it is the most beautiful marriage of desserts that I can imagine. We're taking all of the best components of a carrot cake, like the shredded carrot and the sweetened coconut, the pecan pieces, and the spices, and we're incorporating it into a classic cinnamon roll recipe. The first step to making most cinnamon roll doughs is to make your yeast sponge, which is a really simple mixture of yeast, some warm milk, and some sugar, and setting that mixture aside for about 10 minutes so that the yeast can start to consume some of the sugar and activate. Then when we incorporate the rest of the ingredients, it'll produce all of the necessary air that we need and flavor in our cinnamon roll dough. So I have milk here that's been heated to somewhere between 110 and 115 degrees. It's important it's at this temperature because if it's too hot, it'll kill the yeast. And if it's too cool, it won't encourage the yeast to activate. So this temperature is kind of the sweet spot. And if you touch the milk, you'll notice that it's warm, but it's not too hot that you need to pull your finger out. So here I've got 1 cup of this warm milk that I'm gonna add to my bowl. And to this bowl, I'm also gonna add the contents of 1 packet of instant yeast and 1/3 a cup of granulated sugar. I'm gonna whisk this together, set it aside, forget about it for 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and make the rest of our dough. My sponge is ready to go, and you can tell because it's really foamy on top. If you tap the bowl, you'll notice that the top will kind of slide around, and that's a good sign. So to this, we're gonna add our dry ingredients and some oil. The first ingredient I'm gonna add is a 1/4 cup of vegetable oil, and this just makes sure that the cinnamon roll dough is nice and soft. In addition to the oil, I'm adding 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, the zest of 1 orange, and 3 spices. I've got 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves. These spices and the orange zest are going to make the dough of the cinnamon roll have a flavor similar to carrot cake. Granted, the filling of the cinnamon rolls is going to actually have carrot pieces and some more spices in it, but by perfuming the dough with these spices and the orange zest, it makes the entire cinnamon roll kind of take on that carrot cake flavor quality that makes the dessert a special combination of these 2 beloved desserts. I'm just gonna take a spoon, it could be plastic or wooden, and stir this until a shaggy dough forms, and then I'm gonna knead it for about 3 minutes until it's perfectly smooth. Because of the oil content in the dough, you don't even really have to worry about flouring your surface because it won't wanna stick. As you're kneading the dough, you'll get hit by the aroma from the spices that are in the dough, which is just very pleasant. I'm finished kneading my dough and I can see specks of the spices evenly distributed throughout the dough. I can see little flecks of orange from the zest in the dough. And now I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna transfer it to a greased bowl that I'm gonna cover with plastic wrap and set aside until the dough doubles in size, which will take about an hour. You want to place your dough in probably the warmest place in your house because the gentle warmth will encourage the yeast to metabolize and grow and produce air. So I'm going to set this aside in my laundry room because that's the warmest spot in my place and revisit it in an hour. Your typical cinnamon rolls have a filling that's a simple mixture of granulated sugar, some cinnamon, and some butter, sometimes some vanilla. But these carrot cake cinnamon rolls really take advantage of the filling to make something that's super flavorful and has some fun, chewy components that you would find in your everyday carrot cake. So the first ingredient that's gonna go in here is 3/4 cup of dark brown sugar. This is gonna be the base of the filling, and then everything else is kind of riffing on what would normally be a pretty standard cinnamon roll filling. So, of course, we're gonna incorporate 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon and a 1/4 teaspoon of kosher salt, and then the fun ingredients. So here I have 3/4 cup of shredded carrot. You can use a cheese grater to grate the carrot. You can buy shredded carrots. You can use a microplane to get a really fine shredded carrot, whatever you like. If you want something a little chewier, then I would go the box grater route. If you want something a little more smooth, then I would go a finer grate, like from a microplane. So I have 3/4 cup of shredded carrot here, and I'm just gonna dump this right in. I'm also gonna add 1/4 cup of shredded sweetened coconut and 2 tablespoons of finely chopped pecans. All right, and the final ingredient that turns this mixture into a spreadable sugary paste is 2 tablespoons of melted unsalted butter. Okay, and now just stir to combine. The carrot and the coconut are gonna give these cinnamon rolls a slightly chewy component that's a little sweet and a little nutty, and then the pecans are just gonna be slightly crunchy little bits evenly spread throughout the cinnamon rolls. It really is a hybrid of 2 desserts that are pretty different, but when they come together, make something kind of extraordinary. All right, my filling is done. I'm gonna set it aside for when my dough is ready to shape and roll, and I'll see you in about 45 minutes. My dough has doubled in size, and you can see how big and airy it is. And now you're gonna take your hand and you're just gonna press down on the dough to expel all of that extra air in the dough. As you're pressing down on the dough, you can hear the air coming out, and now you're gonna have a disc of dough that you're gonna transfer to your work surface. I'm now gonna generously flour my work surface and the surface of my dough and roll it out into a 22 by 14 inch rectangle. Flouring the work surface just means that the dough is really easily gonna come off of the table as we're rolling, which is important. You don't want the dough to snag to the table while you're trying to create a nice tight roll for the cinnamon rolls. The dough smells so good. It smells like cinnamon and orange and yeast, which is just a lovely, lovely fragrance to be hit with when you're baking. It's always a good idea as you're rolling to maybe pick up the dough to make sure it's not sticking and redust underneath if you need to. Now that my dough is evenly rolled out and it's not sticking to the table, I'm going to take the filling that we've already prepared and evenly scatter it on the surface, leaving about a 1-inch margin all around the edges of the dough. And I'm just gonna use my hands. If you wanna use a spatula, you can use that instead, but I kinda like working with my hands. And then I'll show you how to roll. Okay, and then working from the long edge furthest from myself, I'm gonna tightly roll this edge in and then continue rolling, trying to prevent a lot of air or loose dough from getting in the way of the roll. So a trick that I have is as I'm rolling, I will sometimes pull the dough away from me as I continue to roll. This makes the dough extra tight as it's pulling against the gluten. And then as I'm rolling, that tightness will force the circle inside the cinnamon roll to be even firmer and more held together. You can see here I'm pulling against the dough and then rolling. And this is just creating that nice, firm, and tightly held together swirl. And I keep working back and forth from one side to the other, just so that the roll is even. All right, and I have my roll right here. With my roll in front of me, what I'm about to do would be blasphemy to some bakers, and if that's you, then disregard. But I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I don't really like having the swirly, sloppy edges. I always cut the edges of my cinnamon roll log off so that I have nice flat sides on all of my cinnamon rolls. And then I'm gonna cut this log into 12 equal portions. A quick and easy way to do that is to just halve the log and then halve each halve, so then you're working with quarters, and cut each of those quarter segments into 3 cinnamon rolls. Now with my cinnamon rolls cut, it's time to transfer them to the pan. The recipe calls for a greased and parchment paper lined 9 by 13 baking dish. That's a great way to bake these cinnamon rolls. I happen to have my 9 by 13 already in use with something else. So I'm gonna use 2 8-inch cake pans, which kind of function in the same way. So I'm gonna evenly place 6 of these cinnamon rolls in one of my cake pans and 6 in the other, spacing them apart just a little bit because we're then gonna cover them and set them aside for another 30 minutes to rise, and they'll kind of expand pretty dramatically so that they'll start touching. So I'm gonna do that in my 2 cake pans, set them aside for 30 minutes, and then we're ready to bake them. My cinnamon rolls are covered. I'm gonna go put them in my laundry room because it's nice and warm in there, and we'll be back in 30 minutes. It's been 30 minutes and I can see that my cinnamon rolls have gotten really puffy and big and they're ready to go into the oven. So my oven is preheated to 325 degrees and these are gonna bake until they're nice and lightly golden around the edges, which will take about 25 minutes. If we take a really hard look at what a cinnamon roll is, it really is a dessert, even though it's a breakfast food. So making carrot cake cinnamon rolls, it seems fitting to me that we don't pretend like it's not a dessert, and we give it the respect that it's due. Meaning, we're not gonna just top it with some sort of powdered sugar glaze. We're gonna make a very simple but really delicious and kind of decadent cream cheese frosting to just spread a dollop on each of the cinnamon rolls before you serve them. You'll notice in the recipe that to make this frosting, we call for a stand mixer, which you can absolutely use. But I don't want to wash mine, so I'm just going to do it in a bowl with a spoon because that works just as well too. So here I have 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter that's at room temperature and 3 ounces of cream cheese that's at room temperature. It's really important they're at room temperature because they won't really incorporate very easily if they're cold. So I'm going to combine these together in my bowl and just beat it together with a spoon or in your mixer until they're fully smooth. All right, and because these guys are room temperature, they come together super quickly. So I'm gonna add 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla extract to this mixture and 1/8 teaspoon of kosher salt. And I'm just gonna mix this together to combine. To this, I'm just gonna add 1 cup of powdered sugar. I'm gonna stir a little slowly in the beginning just because the powdered sugar is gonna wanna kind of fly out. But then I'm gonna increase the speed as I'm mixing it with my spoon until it's nice and satiny and smooth, which will take about 1 to 2 minutes. And just like that, I have a bowl of cream cheese frosting that I'm gonna set aside until my cinnamon rolls are ready to eat. I just pulled my cinnamon rolls out of the oven and I'm gonna let them cool. I like my cinnamon rolls to still be a little warm. I honestly don't know anyone who doesn't. So I'm gonna pull one out when it's not too hot to burn me, but hot enough to make me excited. I'm gonna put a dollop of my cream cheese frosting on it when it's ready to go and dig in. You'll notice there is this caramel at the bottom of the cinnamon roll where some of the butter and sugar has seeped out as it's baked. And I recommend scooping some of that extra caramel and just kind of spreading it on your cinnamon roll because why waste it? I have my beautiful cinnamon roll here and it is ready to be topped with some cream cheese frosting. When it's hot, if you put cream cheese frosting on it, it's gonna melt a little bit, but that's still delicious. So I'm gonna do it. My cinnamon roll is ready to try. The dough is so soft, the fork just kind of tears right through it. And I don't know if you can see this, but the inside is super gooey and you can see the flecks of spices and you can see the carrot pieces and the coconut pieces. This feels like such a special treat for breakfast. And that's because it's dessert, but on top of that, it's just gooey and flaky and slightly buttery and caramelly. And I'm chewing through the bits of like coconut and caramelized sugar on the bottom. But the rest of the cinnamon roll is just soft and so aromatic with the orange zest and the spices. It's like a perfect dessert. Again, I cannot recommend this recipe enough. And if you've liked this video, like and subscribe below so you don't miss any videos in the future. And if you make these, give them a shot, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear how it goes. Thanks so much and we'll see you next time. Bye.